For those of you that have joined late, once again, my name is Brett. I'm a landscape architect with Parks and Recreation. The St. Paul River Balcony Project is led in partnership with my colleague, Mary DeLate. She's the Executive Director of the Great River Passage Conservancy. I also want to call out the Great River Passage Conservancy Chair, Peter Myers, and the members of the Conservancy Board. So I'd like to begin the presentation by saying the City of St. Paul feels a responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which we work. We also recognize and acknowledge that the land in which we work and live is the traditional and ancestral home of the Dakota people. We also recognize the painful past of the Dakota people's forced removal from their land. And by offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and encourage everyone to learn more about the historical heritage held in the land they occupy. So related to that historical heritage, the Mississippi River also has many other spiritual connections for the cultures in St. Paul right now. In fact, I think many people on this call would argue that the river is one of St. Paul's greatest assets, and that's why we are here today. And for this reason, the River Balcony Project is part of the Great River Passage, which is a bold initiative along the 17 miles of riverfront in St. Paul to allow people to experience the river in new and equitable ways. And so developed from the Great River Passage Plan was the 2017 River Balcony Master Plan. You can find this online. It was approved by the St. Paul City Council. It's going to be on our project website. So this current schematic phase of our project, which we're going to talk about tonight, will begin to advance some of the design principles that were suggested in the 2017 Master Plan, such as increasing accessibility, connecting public spaces to civic landmarks and to development sites, and enhancing connections to the river, both horizontally and vertically along the bluff. And so tonight, we'll go through the project. The city has hired James Corner Field Operations out of New York to complete the schematic design process. It is important to note that these are initial plans and sketches that you'll see tonight and that we'll be presenting here soon. And so they're high-level drawings and they're conceptual in nature. So the project team has reached out to some of the neighboring stakeholders, but we just want to let you know that further coordination is needed with our partner institutions, as well as the community who is on the call now. So I'd like to introduce Lisa Switkin. She is the senior principal with Field Operations, and she will provide a project overview, including analysis, outreach, and overview of the River Balcony Plan. So enjoy.
Great, thanks so much, Brett. It is great to be here. It's really a great pleasure to be here and to share some of our initial ideas for the River Balcony. I first did want to say thank you, of course, to Mary and Brett, the Conservancy in the City of St. Paul, and also to our design team. So this is definitely a collective effort in many ways. Most of our design team is actually local to St. Paul, and you may know them, and many are here with us tonight. So I wanted to quickly go through really the purpose of the meeting tonight, as well as the agenda in brief, and then we'll get right to the ideas. So tonight's really about sharing where we are, both the progress and process, as well as sharing some of our initial ideas. We also do want to break out into smaller groups and hope to foster a conversation and gather feedback, which will inform the design, and also just generally to kind of build community support, consensus, momentum, all of those things. The agenda tonight, Brett just did the welcome and overview. There'll be a relatively short design presentation given by myself and my colleague, Sanjukta Sen. We will be doing that in approximately 30 minutes or so. Then we'll have about a 30-minute period to do the breakout conversations, and then we'll bring everyone back together to kind of do a short report back to share key takeaways. We'll talk about some next steps, and we will adjourn for the night. So next, the schematic design scope. So I just wanted to quickly give you guys a kind of briefing of sort of what is happening in schematic design. Schematic design is just the first phase of design, and it really encompasses site analysis, exploring some of the design concepts and basic features and programming, and starting to get a kind of general idea of the look and feel of the project. But this schematic design is also really with an eye towards implementation and towards long-term stewardship. So there's a number of other pieces that we're working on. The focus of tonight will really be to look at the initial design ideas, but we are also starting to do preliminary estimates, which are capital costs as well as long-term maintenance and operation costs, looking at preliminary phasing and implementation, high-level funding, approaches for partnerships and governance. You will see through the presentation how imperative it is that, this is a project that like stitches together everything else. So it touches many other different projects, sites, initiatives, land, et cetera. And we're also going to be working on our preliminary public art approach and strategy. The timeline, the schematic design phase is approximately 10 months. We're still relatively early in that phase. We have 6 months left, and we're early in the process. We're really looking forward to comments and feedback that will inform the work. And we will be back together in the spring, and we anticipate a kind of final reveal in the early fall. In terms of outreach and engagement, which is of course essential in every project, I did want to recognize our engagement team led by 106 Group, and actually Regine Kennedy and her team is here tonight. Claim Our Space, Katie Battistroyer and her team as well. Katie's also here tonight. You will see her a little bit later. Forecast Public Art with Jen Krava and her team. And we're also working with Sam Obelkson, who's the Great River Passage Conservancy's tribal consultant. Sam is also here tonight and helping a facilitator. And Sam is actually looking at the river's front holistically, as well as how the river balcony fits into the larger picture. The community engagement plan, in summary, we're really trying to engage in multiple ways and multiple formats and forums. This is including technical advisory and stakeholder committees, recently hosted a series of focus groups, and these were with historically underrepresented populations, including Hmong, Somali, Black, and Latinx Hispanic communities. We are going to have a series of community workshops. Tonight is our first one, the next one in May, and another one in the early fall. We've been doing a series of surveys. The first one went out in November. Some of you may have participated, so thank you for your feedback. We will be doing a second one actually in the coming days, and part of the breakout groups tonight is actually kind of taking that second survey. There's passive engagement. This really just means that we've been posting some large-scale boards. Hopefully some of you may have seen them in the lobbies of institutions and project partners. Thank you if any of you are here tonight who have loaned us your lobbies. And this is just to, again, try to engage a wider reach and audience. And it also gives links to the website where you can find out more. And we've also been doing translations of the surveys in the project website in Spanish, Hmong, Karen, and Somali to try and make it as inclusive as possible. So some of the things that we've heard, we've had a series of site walks with different committee members, and that was a really fundamental actually to our understanding of the place and really how it can strengthen and align all of the other ambitions and desires and initiatives in St. Paul, many of which are kind of surrounding and really anchoring about the river and how to kind of turn forward to the river instead of have the back to the river. And this project is really unique because it really stitches all of those different initiatives together. The first survey that we put out in November, maybe unsurprisingly, the top priority was really connecting people with the river. But there was also a great desire for creating public space at the river's edge and access not only to just public space, but quality outdoor space, followed by linking development to the river, encouraging and supporting river-based tourism. And the top uses were really walking the promenade, grabbing a bite to eat, relaxing and enjoying the view, but also really, again, stressing the importance of access to the river and the ability to attend special events. Some of the feedback that 106 Group and Claim Our Space, who recently hosted the focus groups, heard was specific feedback about places for health and wellness, the importance of affordable housing as part of the development sites, a desire not only for events, but culturally relevant events and family-oriented activities, the potential for fishing access and places to mark life's milestones, which we thought was really beautiful, uniting both sides of the river and how this project has the power to do that, as well as a number of other ideas, such as ensuring minority contractors work on the construction, supporting small businesses, and even hiring community ambassadors. So we're lucky that HRNA Advisors is on our team, and the next few slides is actually their work, but I wanted to kind of briefly recap it because the team has really been looking at who the river balcony will serve and who we're really trying to reach. And so I'm going to summarize some of their initial findings. The first of which is just that parks, even the ones that are probably thought of as iconic tourist destinations, are primarily served by their residents. So that's the adjacent neighborhoods and the wider sort of cities and metros that they serve. And most parks don't actually have the resources to collect this data, but even if we look at Central Park, over half of visitors are from the adjacent neighborhoods and much of the rest are New York City residents. So first and foremost, park serves the residents. The next piece are just some initial demographics about some of the analysis about St. Paul and what this means for St. Paul. So St. Paul is growing. It's attracting highly educated younger population, but also families, older adults, as well as immigrants. And HRNA looked in 3 areas within the downtown area: the downtown core, which is increasingly number of families tend to be white, relatively affluent and well-educated, as well as diverse communities surrounding the core. And to the north, there's really a growing number of African-American and East African immigrants, as well as a substantial Southeast Asian population, specifically Hmong community. And to the south, significant population of Hispanic Latinx residents, in addition to a growing number of Asian residents. So all of that is really to say that while the local residents may be the most frequent visitors, the river balcony will also serve a diverse group across the region, as well as these adjacent neighborhoods. And with some initial analysis, HRNA estimates that 2.9 million annual visits, the majority of whom will be local, is really estimated for the river balcony. And this is taken from annual number of visits from various visitor groups who shared their demographics with us and analysis, as well as benchmarked against other regional parks in the area. And all of this is to kind of come to this idea of value creation that parks also, and benefits that parks really create dozens of benefits. And for this park, 2 of the key benefits that HRNA and the team has identified really align with St. Paul's as a city goals for equitable economic development. And this is both increasing equity and anchoring downtown, through the support of real estate, et cetera. So all of these benefits come together, but they don't, do that by accident. And so it has to be intentional. It takes collaborative visioning with involvement from stakeholders, as well as thoughtful design and successful implementation and maintenance strategies for the space over the long term. Okay, so now I'm going to sort of land in the site. This is the framework plan, and it might seem like maybe a bit of a obvious drawing, but it's the 1.5 mile promenade along the bluff. And there's a couple things I want to point out about this. First is that, the river balcony is anchored by the Science Museum and the River Center to the west, and Union Depot, Lampert's Landing, TPT, Custom House, all of these things to the east. And those 2 anchors are actually really important because they kind of hold the river balcony together. They have these strong terminus at either side. And our initial effort was dedicated to literally finding the site. So we were not given a site, and we had to kind of carefully piece together. It was an idea, right? It wasn't really a site on the ground. We had to piece together disparate and adjacent parcels, properties, easements, rights of way. In many cases, it meant overcoming a significant height change from the bluff to the river, crossing roadways, imagining projects that were yet to exist, as well as tying into a number of existing institutions, projects, initiatives, et cetera. So the framework plan really defines the river balcony site by identifying all of these pieces, along with the relevant stakeholders who will participate in actually determining the physical footprint and alignment and character and programming and operations of the river balcony. And we see this really as a living document. We've tried to capture all of these different groups here. Definitely let us know if you feel like there's anyone that is missing and should be a part of this initiative. All of this led to a series of overarching principles. The first one is really the most fundamental one, which is build on what is already here. We were really surprised and kind of captivated by the amount of existing infrastructure that was actually already existing on the site, and started to think about ways that we could strategically reuse and reimagine that infrastructure versus, all of the sort of heroics and gymnastics of trying to create new bridges and decks and things like this. The second was establishing critical connections. And this means both to the river, but also back into downtown through the city streets and, those different view corridors, as well as physical connections, to create discrete and distinctive elements. So, it may not be fully continuous, the river balcony, but we want it to be recognizable, like a string of pearls, that actually become the river balcony itself. Prolonging and extending the stay. This is really about getting people to kind of linger and stay downtown and not just coming for one thing and leaving. Fostering programmatic extensions and synergies. There are a lot of really great institutions here, whether it's the Science Museum, whether it's the public library, et cetera, and really building off of the missions and the different, things that all of those institutions bring to the project, and getting people downtown as they do. The potential to build excitement and activate through interim use. This is something that we're considering across the length of the river balcony, especially at some of the parking lots. This is, again, to just get people excited, start to sort of attract people to the site, as well as allow for different types of events. And then meeting the needs of the local communities and residents, as well as attracting the larger St. Paul community. Next. So some of our inspirations, this was actually a very deep dive that had been summarized into one slide, but I think it kind of speaks to all of the different things that St. Paul and the river balcony kind of have that really resonated with us. Of course, the Mississippi River at St. Paul's most iconic natural and cultural landscape and resource. The Dakota and the traditions and construction methods, techniques, textiles, these are all sort of sources of inspirations that we really feel like can inform the actual design elements and materials, as well as their sort of symbolic meaning. The communities, and really drawing on the unique history, traditions, heritage, and diversity of St. Paul neighborhoods and people. The bluff, and really the power of the bluff in terms of both its vantage as well as its monumentality. It's this unique anchoring feature of the river balcony, and its distinctive kind of sandstone material also could be a unifying and site-specific element. This could be used as walls or seating or paving, et cetera. Minnesota ecoregions. So St. Paul is where the big woods meets the prairie. And, this is inspiration for us when we actually start to get down to thinking about specific plant selection. And grit. And this is really about seeking to kind of maintain the authenticity of the place, as well as finding this kind of unifying design vocabulary that really becomes the river balcony itself. So all of this kind of comes together in this preliminary site plan. I'm going to show it to you kind of all at once, and then Sanjukta is going to sort of walk you through it in 4 different chunks. So moving from west to east, the preliminary site plan basically has a series and sequence of spaces, and these include opportunities for programming, activation, public art, events, food and beverage, alongside the kind of places for walking and viewing and sitting and relaxing. And there's a number of strengthened connections, to the river. The primary features include a series of overlooks, and these are kind of like a string of pearls. They really draw you in from the city. They're visible from the river as well. And there's a series of features along the way, from the Big Woods Walk to the west, a new bluff walk and reimagined Kellogg Mall Park and the 2nd Street Connector as you move to the east. There's an enlivened Lampert's Landing at the water's edge all the way to the east. So all of this is together, but it's a lot to take in as one piece. So Sanjukta is going to join now, and she will walk you through each of the spaces in more detail. Sanjukta.
All right. All right, everyone, we'll take a little walk on this 1.5 miles. We'll do it quickly. I'm sure it'll actually take longer to walk once it's all done, but we'll try to go with this in like 10, 15 minutes. With, like as Lisa mentioned, we'll start at the western anchor of the project. This is sort of the assemblage of sites that front the Excel Energy Center, River Center, the future River Center ramp project, and also coming down topographically to the Science Museum grounds down to the river with Eagle Parkway along one edge. We really see this as an amazing opportunity to create a wonderful sort of symbol of the Minnesota ecoregion that Lisa spoke of. It's really one of our opportunities to create a really beautiful planted environment. So sort of the Big Woods Walk that acts as a trail and leads you up from Kellogg down to the Science Museum grounds to sort of dovetail with some of their educational programming and some of their public-facing programs, such as an amphitheater, and then tying into the future development potentially, which we'll be working on in coordination with some of the city agencies that we've been working with, and potentially looking at alternate ADA access down from up above Kellogg down to the river, which would complement some of the other access points that are there. These, again, as Brett mentioned previously, they're fairly diagrammatic. They'll move around as we coordinate with various groups. But this is really to signal an intention of bringing people down, of connecting people from up above at the Kellogg Boulevard level down to the river. At the Big Woods Walk, the idea is to sort of complement some of the energy of the Excel Center and River Center and provide some spill out zones during game days potentially. Hopefully some of the fun can come out here, and then really have these ideas of some of the ecological elements that we can start seeing here. This shows you sort of the existing assemblage of sites as it is today, and what it could be at a very sort of high level massing level, where you sort of see the Big Woods Walk winding down to the Science Museum grounds, and how the potential development on the site can bridge over the sites. Eagle Parkway as it is today, and a visualization of what that Big Woods Walk could look like, keeping, of course, the Eagle Parkway multi-use trail on the edge, so that that remains in use, and this really is seen as a complementary meander down from Kellogg. Some reference images to sort of point to what these spaces and elements can be, what are the elements that can be actually integrated into the topography and some of the new development that comes along. And then moving on, walking along to, as we head east to really this location, the location of the Science Museum, and this really interesting bridge that we see at Washington Street that brings you all the way from the interior of the city to Rice Park, which is sort of a cultural hub with the Ordway and all of the other institutions around, with the library on its edge as well. We really see this sort of dashed red line as almost like a carpet that brings you down from the city above down to the river. And I think to what Lisa was saying previously, we were really struck by how so many of the pieces are there and really just need some amount of emphasis and calling out to really point to users and pedestrians and visitors in this area that you can actually pretty easily go up and down these. They just need that layer of accessibility, design, and sort of emphasis to point you to those locations. This is a sort of site plan showing how to transect that distance along Washington with an improved plaza, but the Science Museum grounds. We are working pretty closely with the folks at the museum who have been super supportive about some of these ideas, and looking at potentially using some of the infrastructure and really tying it in as a part of the river balcony identity to signal that crossover from the city to the river. look at what exists today in terms of the existing, some of you might be familiar with this existing staircase that comes down with district energy right next to it. And the transformation really looks at improving some of those connections via some simple tools like graphic crosswalks, legibly planted zones, and really pointing people and orienting them to that connection, and also, of course, to the larger institutional presence of the Science Museum itself. Excuse me.
Just one thing to add to that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the sketch, I mean, most of these sketches are meant to show an intention, right? So the overlook isn't designed, and this idea of a river balcony gateway along Shepherd isn't designed yet. That'll happen in the next phase. But there are kind of intentions about these different ways that could actually bring legibility as well as wayfinding to allow people to kind of know that the river balcony is there. And in some of our discussions, this idea about Shepherd and being on, you know, Shepherd and those types of gateways along the road, as well as on the Brough, also came up as something to think about and consider.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And then some precedent imagery about what some of these elements, such as the overlooks and the connections, could look like as they connect the upper level at Kellogg down to the river via the Science Museum. Marching further east, we get to the river's edge site. Some of you might be familiar with this. It used to be the site of the old county jail, and currently it's slated for development, and we are working closely with county and with the designers to come up with potential programmatic strategies that are being thought of for the river balcony that might work themselves into how the river balcony places itself adjacent to this site. Some of the potential ideas that might find a place in the future river's edge site. These take advantage of the location of the site and also of the sort of interesting vertical difference that the upper level and the lower level provide, and also other ideas for activation that might draw people to the site in the near and the long term. Moving further east, we get to sort of the heart of the site, really, which consists of Kellogg Park, the East Second Connector, and also the county parking lot at the lower level. We really see this as a really interesting nexus of the project for 4 reasons. It's possibly the last remnant of the bluff in downtown St. Paul, and therefore a really key place to continue experiencing it and appreciate its beauty, its geological beauty. Secondly, of course, Kellogg Park itself is a really great destination. It offers awesome views of the river and across the river. And has an amazing sort of set of mature trees that can really leverage amazing programming down below. East 2nd Street, to us, was a really interesting space. It was almost an existing connection down from up above.
Yeah, that lower left image, I think, is very easy
very telling.
To understand it. Yeah,
you can kind of tell from this image what that condition is. And even though it's currently slated for vehicular traffic, we found it to be fairly underutilized, and our hope is that we can visualize this as a pedestrian access, a primarily pedestrian and bicycle access that can connect Kellogg down to Shepherd and then across to the water. And the last sort of interesting element here, of course, is that it is at the sort of nexus of where Wabusha crosses over from across the river, thereby making it a key sort of point of access at the center point of the river balcony. So all of these together sort of make this a really interesting and really super key location for the river balcony itself. A plan of the upper level of Kellogg Park that sort of uses the existing layer of trees and some of the really interesting water features that occur currently at the street ends, potentially making them interactive as a way to invite more participation in the space, And then really leveraging the view at the Minnesota Street extension to create that to emphasize that amazing vista that you have at the center of this park. At the sort of knuckle of Wabasha Bridge and where it leads down to East 2nd, there's an idea of dissolving that sort of harder upper level edge to create a descent down to the lower level onto the shelf of the bluff that exists there already. This is sort of the lower level park showing East 2nd Street. It's almost as though if you take the lid off of the street and took the park away and we're walking down that East 2nd Street connector, we really see this as an activated second level of Kellogg Mall Park in some ways. Kellogg Mall Park is already in a sort of legible, known public space in downtown, and this could be a really amazing second level that is activated by kiosks, by installations, and potentially this idea of the bluff walk that really takes you down and helps you remember and experience the bluff at close quarters, where you can actually touch it, feel it, and sort of be in it. It's also a really beautiful sort of juxtaposition. As a sort of really great way of revealing the bluff and what used to be there. The lower level, which is the parking lot, is something we see as a candidate for really interesting interim and temporary programs for weekend programming, potential courts, and specific games that actually are interesting for local communities. Some examples of how some of these undercrafts and spaces are used in some other cities. We are looking at these pretty closely for inspiration and precedents. Some examples of interim and temporary programming that could occur at the parking lot. And then we sort of get to what the transformation of East 2nd and that edge along Kellogg could really look like. This is what you see today, a sort of somewhat bereft street that heads down. But you do notice this really beautiful sort of prairie bluff landscape on the right. And the idea is we sort of create this interface that lets you descend from the park down and sort of be in this little plateau as a sort of bluff shelf garden and take you down the river balcony promenade as a part of the bluff walk. These overlooks are proposed as Lisa mentioned previously, as strategic locations to really enhance and focus the views, magnificent views out to the Mississippi. A sort of view of what's it like to be inside East 2nd Street, and the idea of potentially bringing people down and revealing parts of the bluff, exposing parts of the bluff that might be behind this imposed infrastructure that has been kind of carved through the bluff. We do understand there might be some structural challenges at some of these locations. The idea is to certainly do this work selectively, of course, by consulting with folks from Public Works and, of course, our very capable structural engineers. But really, it is to see where are the moments that we can actually see various facets of this bluff as it used to be in its former iteration. Some examples of how materiality of this nature can exist together, sort of the imposed concrete along with some of the naturally occurring stone. And then finally, the sort of view that we are trying to really celebrate at the end of Minnesota Street by creating a cut down from the park level down to East 2nd. And here you sort of see an after image of maintaining that floating promenade up above, but carving our way down to East 2nd Street, not only as a means of access, but also as a way of really focusing on that amazing view. Moving further to the east.
Just in case it wasn't clear, which I think it was, but I just wanted to reemphasize it, it's just that idea for East 2nd is to completely pedestrianize that, as well as integrate ideally a bike lane to create a seamless kind of pedestrian-friendly connection, which is covered, which is obviously useful, especially in the winter and cold months, but to totally revitalize it and reimagine it.
Mhm. And this brings us at the end of 2nd Street down to the eastern anchor of the project, which we really see as a collection of institutions and sites all the way up from Union Depot, TPT, and Custom House within the city, down through the railroad underpasses to Lambert's Landing. And this is such a sort of a key location at the eastern anchor of this project because it really occurs at the confluence of two key modes of entering the city, right? The sort of the terrestrial railroad mode at Union Depot, and then up the river on the Mississippi through the cruise boats that would come to Lambert's Landing, and really collectively they serve as a portal into St. Paul. So it's a significant site from that respect. And the idea here is to really build on some of the ideas of enhanced streetscape strategies, and then really looking at making the passage through these railroad underpasses safe and beautiful and really engaging to bring people through easily across Shepherd, which can sometimes be seen as a bit of an obstacle right now, to this point at Lambert's Landing, where the river balcony really touches the Mississippi. This is one point where we really see it physically coming down and touching the river. The site itself at Lambert's Landing is somewhat narrow. It's a long, narrow dock. And we're really interested in ideas for programming it that are complementary to, of course, the cruises. The Viking cruises will start operating here soon. So programming that will engage people, not only cruise goers who will land here, but also others who would like to see this as a sort of recreational element that is an extension of the river balcony itself.
And this is obviously a place where you might get, somewhat the widest kind of audience and reach. I mean, you're connecting to significant transportation nodes with Union Depot, as well as, on the river with the Lambert's Landing. So it's a really unique moment and gateway, which is definitely needing of some love right now.
Yeah. And to that end, we are trying to express that love by creating some of these interesting structures that really make the landing visible, not just from the river, but also from the city, and potentially provide concessions and amenities such as a welcome center or a warming hut where you might get a hot chocolate or a drink if you're out
there. Even a river cafe, we've heard would be a good idea.
Right. So the idea is to really activate it and create it as an attraction and a magnet at this end of the project. Some ideas regarding what we just spoke of regarding bringing people through safely. These are from some other projects in other cities. The idea is not to stay under those railroad passes for too long, but to really create a sort of interesting walk through with simple measures such as art and lighting that we can install and hopefully get permitted quickly as we proceed with the project. And then really looking at how to transform this narrow dock, which has limitations in terms of its size, really using the upper level and the lower level to create a sort of interesting enclosure and a feeling of space that really expresses itself as a portal to the river and back to the city. Some examples of what these elements at the landing could potentially look like and really help to animate.
I think these are useful because you see, like, even in very tight, compressed spaces, there's still a way to kind of begin to think about them both in terms of programming and design to make them really successful in a place.
Yeah. And this, I believe, might be almost our last slide, but it kind of goes back to this was almost one of the first sketches we did, I think, of how we imagined, to go back to some of the principles that Lisa was speaking to earlier, a set of features even that kind of string along as a set of pearls that really express the presence of the river balcony, as an experience that you can kind of connect the dots along in some ways. And while it might not always be the same exact experience in all stretches, the idea is that you're able to get these cues of these elements, and there's a language of elements that really, and experiences that really brings you through this mile and a half as an amenity and an experience. So this is kind of our site plan that summarizes all the spaces and all of the features that we are proposing here. And
yeah, great. So thanks, Sanjukta. That was hopefully, a very brief but hopefully informative presentation. There's obviously a lot of other work that sort of went behind some of these initial ideas. But we now are going to be moving you into breakout rooms so we can actually have conversations in smaller groups. We are capturing the chat and some of the great conversations and questions that are happening there. Bring those to your smaller groups, and we'll also be circulating a kind of wrap up of some of these discussions and questions. Each of the breakout rooms will have a facilitator and a scribe, so they'll kind of guide you through the process, but we're basically going to be asking 5 questions, having a discussion, identifying some of your key takeaways, and then we're all going to come back to the main room together in about 30 minutes, and each group will have someone to kind of report back a 2-minute recap of their key takeaways. So thank you very much. I will turn it over to Katie. I think you can stop sharing, Sanjukta.
Yep.
Great. So momentarily, I'm going to be opening all the breakout rooms. You're going to be sent over to them. No need to do anything. I've removed that button. And so we will see you back here in a little less than 25 minutes. Thank you.
Great.